The following episode was originally recorded for a private podcast as part of the Equipped for Life course. It has been edited for public release, but may reference training material from the Equipped for Life course.
But anyway, St. Catherine's Right to Life have a young gentleman from Charlotte, North Carolina. I've never been to North Carolina. It's the city where Dr. Billy Graham just died, God rest his soul. Josh Brahm, he has the same surname as Brahms without the S.
That's right. No relation.
He's not going to give us music today, but there might be a heavenly harmony in what he has to say. He's founded some human rights institute, and he goes around talking on pro-life issues. So, Josh, you're extremely welcome.
Thank you very much.
I was going to say, come again. Well, we'll
I'd love
see.
to.
We'll see you at the end of the presentation. But I'm sure it'll be absolutely excellent. And please hold forth.
Thank you. That was the warmest welcome I've received in a while. That's great. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. It's truly an honor to speak to so many pastors, to future pastors, and people who are teaching pastors. So this is a bit different than the people that I usually talk to. Our kind of target demographic are college students who are pro-life and are trying to learn how to have better dialogues. But I have some thoughts that I'd love to share with you about what you could do as a pastor. And so I think what I'm just going to do is just tell you just a little bit about myself, give you just a little bit of background. And if nothing else, that might help with Q&A, give you a sense of kind of what kinds of things you might be interested in asking about, because I'd love to spend some time taking your questions. And then just share with you just a little bit of what I've been talking to pastors about lately, about this issue. I don't want to spend a lot of time making a pro-life case. I'm just going to kind of assume that you believe abortion is wrong. We believe in the Bible. I can make a pro-life case. We know that humans are made in God's image, so that means that humans are intrinsically valuable, not based on what they can do functionally, but because of the kinds of things that they are, because God did something very special when he made us in his image. We reflect God in a certain way, and the Bible clearly says that the shedding of innocent blood is wrong, and then that just means there's a question of what are the unborn? Are the unborn humans made in God's image, or are they not? I believe that they are. We know that scientifically, and so we know that abortion is wrong. I had a Christian recently say, well, the word abortion is not in the Bible anywhere. And I said, well, it doesn't also say that you can't throw people into shark tanks. So I just feel like I don't think the Bible has to clearly state every single way of killing is wrong. I think it's a question of are you killing humans made in God's image or not. So we could make that case. I'm just going to kind of assume you're with me on that. I'd like to go kind of deeper and talk about what you as pastors could do, because I think it's very scary as pastors, at least from the pastors that I talk to. No, how do I talk about this issue in a way that's actually going to be helpful to my congregation? I think that is a tough question, and I'd love to hopefully just share a few thoughts that might actually be helpful to you. But as a little bit of background, I've known I wanted to be in the pro-life movement since I was 11 years old. I had the unique privilege of God calling me very young. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. My parents were very pro-life. We're homeschoolers. We were homeschooled. That's why I'm so weird and antisocial. And so my dad, when I was 11, took me to an abortion clinic with a group of men to pray from our church. We had a very pro-life church, very pro-family church. It was a Protestant church, and yet people had 8, 9, 10 kids, and it wasn't weird. And so we went to this abortion clinic. No one had told me what sex was. No one had told me what abortion was. So I was just bored. I didn't really understand what was going on. But that day I learned what abortion was, and I had 3 distinct emotions that day. Of one, I felt very surprised because I was in a bit of a cultural bubble of, everyone loved kids. Everyone had babies and big families, and everything was like, so just the idea that anyone would want to do that was a big, my cultural bubble was pierced for the first time. And the second thing, I felt very sad. Not angry, but very, very sad. And then I had this rising emotion of I guess I'm going to have to stop that when I grow up. So I read this wonderful philosophy book by Dr. Frank Beckwith that just came out called Politically Correct Death, his first book on abortion. And then I listened to a bunch of talks by the first pro-life apologist named Scott Klusendorf. I listened to his tapes like 20 times. I memorized that guy's arguments. I memorized his jokes. And I knew when I was telling people, what do you want to be when you grow up? I wasn't going to be a firefighter. I wasn't going to be an astronaut. I was going to be a pro-life speaker, which may be an odd 11-year-old. But I knew what I was going to do. And I got involved full-time when I was 18, and I'm 34 now, and so I was right. So what I am interested in most, though, is helping pro-life people. I'll tell you real quick. So I was in the Denver airport a while back, and I sat across from a woman in her late 30s, like a businesswoman, I had just enough time to kind of eat my sandwich and get on my plane as he asked me the question that I've always hated. What do you do for a living? It's like, oh, God. It's like, what can I say if she's pro-choice? It's not going to get this started on the wrong foot, getting her hating me from the moment I open my mouth. So I gave her a different answer that day than I ever given before. And now this is my go-to response. This is how I sum up what I do. She said, what do you do for a living? I said, I help pro-lifers to be less weird. And she kind of smiled a little bit. So I was already on this. This is better than the previous attempt. And she said, what does that mean? I said, well, I'm trying to help pro-life people to make more good arguments and fewer bad ones. And maybe more importantly, I would like to help us relationally connect with people who are different from us, people who are coming from a different religious background or political background. What would it look like if we could do that well? But when I'm around religious people, I give a slightly different answer that I think is the same. It's just I'm explaining it in a different way. But this is our heart. This is the heart of Equal Rights Institute that we started 4 years ago. We want to help the pro-life movement to become more like Jesus. So what would it look like if Jesus talked to a pro-choice person? That's what I'm very interested in. What would his body language be like? What kinds of questions would he ask? What kind of questions would he not ask? And what would it sound like when he made arguments that are grounded in truth, not holding back from truth, but spoken with gentleness and grace? I want to help the movement to get closer to that mark. And so the things that we are most interested in, and we have published about 150 articles, we have an online course now, we have a couple of podcasts. The areas that we are the most focused on are practical dialogue tips. So our staff has cumulatively had about 5,000 conversations with pro-choice people, face-to-face conversations with pro-choice people. We've learned a lot of things that, for example, don't work. We've learned a lot from mistakes. We've also learned a lot of things that are very helpful, that create an environment where the person feels emotionally safe, feels safe to actually reconsider their view. So I've got a lot of thoughts about practical dialogue tips. We talk about philosophy. There are some good pro-life arguments, and there are some very bad pro-life arguments. There are also some arguments that are true, but just not persuasive to pro-choice people because they've got different presuppositions coming into it, usually. So we have thoughts about that. And then I also talk a lot about relational apologetics, which is the art of cultivating friendships with people who are different from you. That is part of my vision for the pro-life movement down the road, is what if we could inspire the movement to get out of our echo chambers, out of our comfortable, white middle-class churches, and go out in the world and have actual deep friendships with people who are pro-choice, and say, like, hey, can we do something kind of weird, but like good weird? Could we, instead of doing talking about politics the way everybody is these days, where they're yelling at each other in all caps on Facebook, could I take you to Tim Hortons? Could we go to Timmy's and I'm going to buy you coffee and we'll get together every couple of weeks or once a month and talk about this issue? Because I've seen you post pro-choice things on Facebook and you seem really thoughtful and I want to understand pro-choice people better. So could I buy you coffee? And let me just hear what you have to say. And if you're interested in what I have to say, I'm happy to share with you. But I'm an open-minded person and I would like to understand better where you're coming from. What if everybody did that? Because there's some people that can only change their mind if they go through a process like that. It's not I've seen people change their mind in one day, in one conversation. That's rare. You've got, the stars have to align. You've got to be dealing with an open-minded person who probably doesn't have any previous history with abortion. All the things have to go right. And it happens. But usually, people change their minds slowly about serious issues. As my friend Jonathan Fincher said, people change their minds the way water changes the contours of a rock, slowly. Friendship, in that context, is a place where you can develop rapport, develop trust. Where if the person that disagrees with you finds out basically two things, that you are intelligent and that you are virtuous. Those two things make a very powerful chord. And they will take what you have to say more seriously than they would if they heard me on the radio or something like that. And so I want to see the movement focus more on that. But what I would like to do is just talk about something a little bit different, just for a little bit. Let's talk about what can pro-life pastors do? I used to have how should I say this? I used to be pretty impatient with pastors that I perceived to be cowards on this issue. Because I felt like basically pastors, I'm assuming you believe the Bible on the value of human life. If you're not talking about this issue, then you must either be ignorant or fearful like a coward or apathetic. And I think there are those pastors, but I've come to believe that there is a much more understandable reason for pastors to not talk about this issue. One that I have a lot more sympathy for, which is pastors know, especially if you're not at like a mega church where you don't know a lot of people in the congregation. If you know your congregation, you know that there are post-abortive people in your congregation. You know that there are people in your congregation. You know that there are women in your congregation who have been to abortion clinics or hospitals or whatever, and a doctor killed their baby. And maybe they know that too. You've got men in your congregation who encourage their girlfriends to do that. And so it's kind of like, how do you talk about an issue where we believe that abortion is actually killing babies? How do you talk about that in a way that is not going to send the people in your congregation into this spiral of depression at best and being suicidal at worst? I think that's a very understandable concern for a pastor to have. And I think it makes a lot of sense to me why a lot of times pastors will talk about every issue except this one for that reason. Because it is so sensitive for the people in the congregation, and a lot of people in the congregation. There are a lot of abortions that happen within the church. But I was talking to someone one time who said something really interesting. She said that she was post-abortive. And then she ended up at this church where the pastor was willing to talk about political issues or moral issues. It wasn't just, well, you know, like there's some pastors are kind of like, we're only talking just straight from the Bible, going through books of the Bible. He would bring up issues sometimes. She said, every issue except abortion. It was like the A word. He never spoke it. And she said, the effect it had on me was that it made me think, oh, this is the unforgivable sin. This is so bad. My pastor, who will talk about pornography, who will talk about adultery, who will talk about human trafficking, he won't even say this word. So this must be the one sin that even God can't forgive me for. And it wasn't actually helpful to her, even though I think her pastor was very well-meaning. Like, assuming he falls in this category, the reason that he wasn't talking about it was he was concerned for post-abortive people like her. And so there's this interesting thing where it's like understandable, I think, to be like, well, if we don't say anything about it, then we're not going to cause people to like be sad or regretful or feeling these feelings of guilt and shame. But if you don't ever talk about it, I think it actually makes it worse. I think the Christian message is that there aren't unforgivable sins, that God is eager and willing to forgive any sin, including the sin of abortion, if we come to him and accept that gift. And so I would encourage pastors to be willing to talk about it sometimes, but talk about it in the context of grace, in the context of what Christ did on the cross for us. But recently I had this other idea, something that pastors could do that I'm getting really excited about. This happened spontaneously. I was at a homeschool conference last year. And there was this big homeschool conference, and we had a booth. We're trying to sell our online courses because we thought, you know, like homeschool moms, we were like, hey, train your teens up to talk about this issue before they go to college. And, like there's people waiting to pound them there, with pro-choice. Like train them up here, and we'll help you, and then send them to college. And so, but if you have a booth at these things, you get to do a talk. But everyone who has a booth gets to do a talk. So I was competing with 15 other workshops at that hour. So everyone's got these rooms of like 20, people maybe. And so I'm meeting everyone as they walked in, and as I got to know them, one of them was a youth pastor from Alabama who had just said, like, this seemed like the topic that was most interesting to him. So it wasn't coming as a parent, he was coming as a youth pastor. And I don't remember what the question was during Q&A that provoked this. We've got a recording of it. I need to look it up. But someone asked me some question that kind of just got me in an impromptu, rant is probably too negative a word, but it's like really I just focused in on that youth pastor. Just like, here's what if you can get your church to do one thing, here's what I'd love for your church to do. And so this is what I would say to you too, and for your future churches. There were a lot of Christian abortions. I'm using the word Christian in a very broad sense, the church, the capital C church. There were a lot of Christian abortions, and those are the worst abortions. Because those are girls who know that they killed a baby. And so those people feel the most guilt, the most shame. Like, it's not that big of a deal when the atheist gets pregnant out of wedlock. Like, it's kind of like, whatever. But if you're in a conservative church and you get pregnant out of wedlock, you're in the youth group. It's a big deal. It's terrifying. So a lot of girls in churches have abortions, not because they think that the unborn is not a valuable person, made in God's image, but because they're terrified of what will happen if the word gets out. What if her parents find out? Or what if her pastor finds out? What if her youth pastor finds out? What if the youth group finds out? Will she be made fun of? Will she be kicked out? What will that look like? And she might not know because that situation might not have happened yet in that church, at least not in a way where people know. Maybe other girls have had abortions there, and so no one's really known. There's been a hidden problem. And a lot of churches, I think, would handle it great. Like, not all churches are Westboro Baptist Church, Like, there's a lot of really good churches who would rise up to, rise to the occasion. But she doesn't know that. She doesn't know what will happen if she hasn't seen it before. So, here's my thought. What if once every year or every other year, the pastor and the youth pastor get up on stage and spend 5 minutes in between announcements and sermon talking about what our church is, who our church is going to be if someone gets pregnant out of wedlock. And so you have to initiate this. This has to come from the top down. You don't want to wait for the bad thing to happen and then we talk about it because they're having abortions, because they don't know what happened. So you get up on stage and say, here's who we're going to be if someone gets pregnant. We're going to love on her. It is not a sin to be in the state of being pregnant. That in itself is not sin. Maybe how you got there is, but having a kid in you is not a sin. And so we are going to celebrate people doing the hard thing and not taking the easy way out that would involve killing a child. We are not going to kick her out. We're not going to excommunicate her or the boyfriend. We will come down hard on anyone in the youth group who makes fun of her, who's shaming her. We're going to throw a baby shower. And we're going to say, don't treat the parents like kind of outsiders or like awful parents because, oh my gosh, they had the only teenager ever in the church who was having sex. We're going to come around and celebrate life together. And that's what this church is going to look like. In light of what Christ did for us. While we were yet sinners, right? Christ died for us. And so here's what we're going to do. So I've started talking about this recently. I'm going to write a book on this. A small one. But I'm going to write a booklet that people could give to pastors. Here's the thing maybe we could do. That even some pastors who are a little bit timid about this issue, I think, can get behind this. It's a win-win. You get to talk about how we're going to be like Jesus. And we're going to be loving. We're going to take on the attitude of Jesus with the woman caught in adultery. So all you perfect people, you guys get to cast the first stone. And then said to her, go and sin no more. That's the attitude we're going to have. Not like what the Pharisees would have had. And so my old pastor from Fresno, I used to live in Fresno, California, and then a year and a half ago we moved to Charlotte because it's awful to do national speaking from the Pacific Coast. The way jet lag works. It's terrible. So we moved to Charlotte. But my old pastor heard me talking about this. And so this last Sanctity of Life Sunday, usually if a church has a Sanctity of Life Sunday, it happens around January 22nd because that's the anniversary of Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton. And so he does a pro-life sermon every Sanctity of Life Sunday. He's super pro-life pastor. Every once in a while he'd have me do it. But they're always there's some kind of different angle he'll take on this issue on that day. And this time, this was basically the sermon. Here's how Jesus treated the woman caught in adultery. And I want to be very clear to our entire church who we are going to be if this happens. And he got a text afterwards, the day after, that he sent me from a guy who said, in my 66 years, I have never heard a pastor say that in light of what Christ did for us, here's who we are going to be if a girl gets pregnant in the youth group. Which I was really encouraged. I was actually moved to tears. And I'm not a guy that ever gets moved to tears when anything people say nice things about what we do. But I got very emotional at that. So I was very encouraged. I thanked him profusely for saying to me, my pastor had the opposite reaction. He was discouraged. He was like, I got 4 or 5 people telling me that. And why? How is it that these people have never heard a pastor say this? And what I told him is, I don't think this is the most obvious direction for a pro-life pastor to go who's willing to talk about this. If you're a pastor who believes that it is a good thing for pastors to talk about this issue, I think there's kind of a standard or more obvious direction to take. We're going to talk about Genesis. We're going to talk about God making humans in his image, so humans are valuable, and hopefully you're going to include some stuff about post-abortion recovery, because there are post-abortive people in your church, so you want to get them connected to Bible studies and retreats where people can have an experience with other people who are post-abortive of experiencing God's forgiveness and grace. Like and all of that's good. I'm not dissing any of that. I'm just saying this direction is a non-obvious way to go, but I don't really have to argue for it. Like, this is like when we tell our practical dialogue tips. Like, I don't usually have to argue for our practical dialogue tips. They're just like, oh, like, as soon as you hear it, it's like, yeah, that's a good idea. Like, maybe you even thought of some of them. But then it's like, oh, yeah, I'm totally with you. Like, I don't even feel like I got to argue for this. Of course we should do this. And what if every church did this? Once a year or two. Make sure everyone knows, as people cycle in and out, make sure everyone knows, if this happens, here's who we are. And here's what we're going to do. Here's you as a pastor casting your vision for your church body. Here's who we're going to be. I think that the Christian abortion rate would drop by a lot. Because I believe one of the main things driving the Christian abortion rate is fear. And that would be a great thing. So you're hearing about this early. I haven't even written the article version of this yet because I'm talking to pastors because I want to try to get pastors giving me some practical tips on how a congregant could respectfully and in humility bring this idea to a pastor. Because if you don't know yet, you will find out that you're going to get a lot of congregants who are always telling you what you ought to be doing. And it gets pretty annoying and tedious, and I think a lot of people don't have enough respect for how busy pastors are, how much they care about all these issues, but you can't do everything. And so I'm consulting with some pastors on what would be a really, helpful way and humble way for a congregant. If the congregant hears this idea first, how could they bring this to a pastor in a way that will be helpful to the pastor? But it'll be an article and eventually a book and a website. I'm going to be trying to get pastors to take pledges. Yes, this is who we're going to be. We'll put pins on like a Google map and like, here's the churches that have taken this pledge and here are the pregnancy resource centers nearby that they can be connected with. So there's practical resources for the people in the church that will need them. So, if you're going to be a pastor, I would be so thrilled if you did something like this. I think it would make a great difference. So, I think you've heard enough from me. So what I'd like to do is just open up the floor to any kinds of questions that you have. It doesn't have to be on that concept. We can talk about anything related to practical dialogue tips, to relational apologetics, to pro-life apologetics or philosophy. I just want to help you. I just want to be of service to you for the next half an hour. If you have 0 questions, I've got things I can tell you about that will probably be helpful, but I would rather find out what would be most helpful to you first by hearing what kinds of questions that you might have for me. Yes, in the back.
Hi there. My name's Jordan. I'm one of Harold's colleagues from the military. I just caught the tail end of your speech. I thought that was fantastic.
Thanks.
You think that one of the things to enhance the practicality would be to leverage the websites, the online thing, because the generation right now, if you do it, say, once or twice a year, you might catch a few. But most people, I think, like to sort of poke around on their own and see what's there. So if you take your concept and you put it on website, stuff that they can access online. Yeah. I think that may enhance your idea there.
Yeah, so there will definitely be a website that'll talk about this. There'll be a small book that we'll be trying to get out there. And certainly you want people to be able to hear about it anytime. Like the hope would be that if a youth pastor does it once a year in front of the entire church body during service. Like hopefully, like maybe don't do it in the summer when like half the people are on vacation. Be strategic about it. Obviously you don't have to do it every week. Maybe I'm wrong about once a year being sufficient. Maybe it needs to be twice a year. I don't know. The goal would be that the large majority of the church would know. Maybe it would go along with an email blast that goes out to the congregation, or a little video clip or audio clip of them talking about it, or an article that says, in case you were gone, here's something that we talked about that you ought to know about. Like there's different ways to skin that cat, but that's the objective. Yeah.
Just picking up on the last thing you were saying about the church saying this is what we will do.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to make it clear that we'll put our money where our mouth is and say, if you have this baby, we will help you.
Yes.
We will help you. Because a lot of the time it's what will I do practically? And you can say, we'll accept you. And that's not what they were asking.
Yes.
And so to say we're not just opposed to something, we're actually in favor of this child coming into the world, and we'll provide you resources to help you with it.
Yeah. Does she need a place to stay?
Yeah.
Like, does she get kicked out by her parents? Then find her a place to stay. What does she need? Like, I think that's what Jesus intended for the church to be. So yes, I completely agree. Putting your money where your mouth is something that you ought to be willing to do to love people well and to save lives.
These practical tips you talked about, so do you have a website where those are?
Yeah, so if you go to our blog.equalrightsinstitute.com, there's an archives page linked at the very top. It's the page that I go to all the time because I'm always having to grab links, and all of the articles are listed there. And the first and biggest category is practical dialogue tips. So we're talking about body language, we're talking about, how to find common ground well, how to affirm people's concerns in a way that helps them hear you better. Like, there's a lot of different things that we're talking about there. We also have some in the course, if you want a more systematic approach to the arguments that we use. If you go to equippedcourse.com, we have an online course where we've got 8 practical dialogue tip lesson videos on there. We're adding 9 more, I think, this year is the plan. So we really like trying to just help people get nitty-gritty. Can I give you a shortcut? Here's some of the things that we've learned that just sometimes just like really little things. Like saying what you don't mean. You're making clarity your responsibility, and so there's this kind of pattern, and I notice, and if you start paying attention, you will notice good communicators just do this. You just kind of figure out this is a helpful thing to do to avoid getting straw man, to avoid miscommunication, is doing this pattern of here's what I don't mean, here's what I mean. You're looking for the cases where there might be confusion. So I've been doing this a lot in the school. So when I'm talking about personhood, we get into the difference between humans and animals, and whether animals should have rights or not. And I'm making it very clear that just because I don't think animals and humans are equally valuable doesn't mean I think we should mistreat animals. So it's kind of, here's what I'm not saying. We shouldn't mistreat animals. We shouldn't be like, oh, dogs aren't equal to us, so we can kick dogs. Like that kind of thing. Like, that's not the view. Like, if an animal that can feel pain, that morally matters. That means that we should not mistreat them. I don't even think that we should kill dolphins and gorillas. I'm not even convinced we should capture them. Like, there's different, we can talk about how should humans treat animals. I just merely don't think that they're equally valuable. Meaning, if 50 elephants get rounded up in a field and killed, I think that's really wrong. I think it's more wrong if 50 humans get rounded up and killed in the same field. That's what I'm saying. So I'm being very clear. Here's what I'm not saying. Here's what I'm saying. Because if I don't do that, then they're likely to hear, oh, he doesn't care at all about animals. He just thinks animals are all trash and humans are the only things that matter. And I'm trying to help them understand better, here's what's going on. So it's little things like that. That's just like, once you hear it, it's like, oh yeah, we should totally do that. If you employ that in your dialogues, you'll just see the dialogues become a lot more productive.
And your, for the homeschool courses, was on the Equipped
Yeah,
course?
it's all one course. It's the Equipped for Life course. So it's at equippedcourse.com. And what it is right now is it's about 4 hours of HD video content that we're going to be adding a lot to this year. It came out 2 years ago. So we go through 9 modules. So we're talking about habits and attitudes to avoid. So, how to be a virtuous pro-life person. So be open-minded, reject confirmation bias. Don't be talking disparagingly about people behind their backs, things like that. We're talking about practical dialogue tips. And then we go through a lot of pro-life apologetics, including some of the basics, and then some stuff that's a little bit more advanced philosophically. We're talking about bodily autonomy arguments, utilitarianism, and certainly how to be helpful to people who are either abortion-minded or post-abortive. If you're a pastor, you really want to take that one. You're going to talk to people who are in that situation. And so we had some people on there who talked about kind of some 4 tips that kind of, for both of those categories of people, can be really helpful. It's very different than a philosophical debate. You don't want to just carry over Josh's arguments into, that's the wrong place and time for a philosophy debate. And then there's also a podcast related to it. We'll be adding a lot more practical dialogue tips to it. We're also adding a sidewalk counseling module. And we're just going to keep on adding to it. Yeah, William.
Can I just interrupt there to
Sure.
mention that we, in anticipation of this and enthusiasm for what Josh is doing this course, the St. Catherine's Right to Life has been running a version of this course for the last 2 months, I guess. About 20-odd people have been getting together, looking at the videos and talking about them. And we hope to do that again after his talk Saturday for the Right to Life.
So not tired of me by then.
We can send you a link or something.
Yes.
Yeah, it seems like miscommunication and misunderstanding is, like you said, that you really have to be clear about your things, or otherwise you will be misunderstood. Do you think there is something which pro-life people misunderstand about pro-choice, or is there something we don't get?
Oh, yeah.
Right. And
All the time.
what's a common misunderstanding?
Yeah, great question. What are common ways that pro-life people misunderstand pro-choice people? So one would be, I think we often misunderstand bodily rights arguments. So there's two big areas of disagreement between pro-life and pro-choice people. One of them is, does the unborn morally matter? Is it a clump of cells, or is it a valuable person like you and me? And then the other one is where the pro-choice person is saying, even if you guys are right about personhood, even if it is a valuable person, a woman's bodily autonomy trumps the right to life of the child. In other words, it would be a government overreach to force women to have their bodies used as life support machines, even for other people. Pro-life people hear that argument a lot of times, and they hear an anti-personhood argument. In fact, I'll tell you a quick story. So I was at Fresno Community College, where we used to live, and this other pro-life group was coming down to set up their own display and do a thing. They just kind of notified me by phone, hey, by the way, we're going to come down and do this, and then put up graphic signs and stuff. And so I came just to watch for a little while around the lunch period, just to kind of, I like watching other pro-lifers and see what they do, and what do the signs look like, and what kinds of arguments are they using. And I knew some of the leaders from like way back when, but they were bringing a bunch of young volunteers. So I showed up with my lunch around lunchtime, and because that's usually the busy time at an outreach. It's like between 10:30 and 1 is kind of the busy time where you can have a lot of conversations. And it was empty. They had one lone young volunteer, some like 18-year-old kid, there in front of the signs, and everything else, it was like, the beginning of The Walking Dead, or I Am Legend, where it's just like empty. Everyone was having lunch in the cafeteria. And so I was like, oh, this is weird. So I went to just sit kind of across, a ways away from their exhibit, and I'm eating my sandwich. But the kid sees me, because I'm the only pulse within 200 yards. And so he's like, comes over, hey, what do you think about our signs, And I don't know what got into me. I just kind of reactively said, I'm pro-choice. I don't usually do this. I'm not like the guy that goes around messing with pro-lifers. It's just we've been doing all these seminars lately where we're role-playing with people, trying to play realistic, not stupid pro-choice people. And so I just instinctively just said I'm pro-choice. And it's now I got to pick a persona and be consistent with it. It's why are you pro-choice? And so I was like, I'll be a bodily rights person. So I said, well, I think that the baby is completely dependent on her body, and that we shouldn't force women to be pregnant because then we're forcing that. I think women should be able to do whatever they want with anything inside of their body. And he said, oh, you're saying it's not a person because it's dependent on her. Well, that's not how you know whether it's a person. But dependency has nothing to do with personhood. Their 2-year-olds are pretty dependent on their parents, that kind of thing. And I said, no, that's not what I said. I said, yes, it is in her body, it is dependent on her body, but even if it is a person, we shouldn't force women to be hooked up to other people. That would be too much of a violation of bodily autonomy, of bodily integrity. And he says, you said dependency again. You're saying it's not a person because it's dependent. And I said, dude, I know a few things about pro-life arguments. That's not what I'm saying. It is a person, totally a person. But we shouldn't force persons to be hooked up to other persons. And at that point, he was out. He had nothing to say. And at that moment, the leaders that I knew walked out of the cafeteria and saw me. And they're like, Josh is here! And then the kid was really confused. And so I held up my hand and said, hi, I'm Josh. I'm pro-life, And he says, what should I have said? He's like so stumped. Pro-life people do this a lot. We're just expecting pro-choice people to always be saying that the unborn is not a person. And usually there's a dual thing going on. Yes, most pro-choice people do not think it's a person. They might think it has some value like a golden retriever does. It's got some value, but it's not like you and me, not equal value to you and me. But it's even if a pro-life person were to convince them that they're wrong about that, they have a bodily right safety net underneath that they can land in. And this is an area where I think pro-life people have not generally been that persuasive on. And we're trying to help pro-life people to both understand, not just, there's dumb versions of bodily rights arguments, but there's also very intelligent philosophical ones. So I'm trying to, a lot of my speaking on college campuses is talking about how to understand both of those and how to respond to both of those, not with strawman arguments, not with bad philosophical arguments, but actually really good persuasive thought experiments. So that would be, I think that's the most common misconceptions. We're just expecting people to say, it's not alive, it's not a human, it's not a person. And yeah, we hear it's not a person a lot, but I think actually the more fundamental thing going on for most pro-choice people is a concern for bodily autonomy, for government not doing an overreach. There's a Planned Parenthood ad campaign that they did a couple of years ago. I think it was really effective. They're trying to get people to stop using the term pro-choice. which is hilarious because I've had pro-lifers sending me hate mail for years because I say pro-choice, and they're like, oh, it's pro-person, or it's pro-board, or whatever, you know. And it's like, I just don't want to have the debate always be about what the label is we're going to use for the person and not the actual conversation. So I'll, at least in the beginning, use pretty neutral terminology so we can talk about the real issue, and then I can make my terminology more pro-life as we go. So anyway, Planned Parenthood agrees. Yeah, if you compare pro-choice with pro-life, pro-life wins. You know, life is more important. But, so they started an ad campaign to get things redirected to more of this idea. They don't have like a label they're trying to replace. They're trying to go away from labels, but just more like women should be able to make an individual decision between her and her doctor. So like they made this one ad where it's like there's a woman at like her gynecologist and she's in stirrups and the doctor's there. There's like a medical curtain around, and then there's like this Republican politician in like a three-piece suit. He's like trying to like look through the curtains, just like really acting really weird. And they're like, clearly that's inappropriate, like that kind of thing. They're trying to say, yeah, you're trying to get in between women and her doctor and like that kind of thing. That's the direction they're going. And so, anyway, all that to say that there are definitely misunderstandings between pro-life and pro-choice people. This is why we should listen very clearly. We should try to understand the best pro-choice arguments and not just the lame ones. There are some very smart pro-choice people, so we just want to understand where they're coming from too. David Boonin, Peter Singer, Judith Jarvis Thompson, Michael Tooley, people who believe some very terrible things, but they're not dumb. They're intelligent, they're consistent, but they end up having views that I think are just wrong. I think there are some very intelligent people who end up believing very foolish things.